Hello friends, my name is Matt and welcome to the Imperial Cantina, where everyone can come grab a pint of good old-fashioned Corellian Ale as we talk about Star Wars. As with many science fiction universes, the Galactic Empire is a fascinating antagonist due to a variety of reasons, from the mighty power that it wielded, the pleasing aesthetics of its uniforms and weapons, and just the wide range of personalities that dominated its makeup. With literal decades worth of stories that come from movies, comics, books, and video games, oh my, that make up the Star Wars Legends universe, it is not always going to be the easiest to try and place all those pieces into this wide overall picture, as many of those pieces can come off as both conflicting and contradictory. Now, this is where here at the Cantina, we will be taking a crack at untangling this Gordian knot. We're going to be providing analogies to historical events while adding our own little entertaining twist with a dash of opinions and theories for special measure to help tie all this various Star Wars lore together into a roughly cohesive storyline. So, throughout the series, we're going to be initially looking over a 42-year time period that begins with the year 19 BBY all the way to 23 ABY. So this means I'll be covering the rise of the Empire right after the Clone Wars, its wars of pacification that led to its ultimate heights of power, the rebellion that would eventually spring forth and fracture this empire to its various warlord factions that would eventually be consolidated and absorbed into one regional power right before the Yuuzhan Vong make their appearance. You might be wondering two things. Why the Legends universe and why from the Empire's perspective? The answer is simply with the Legends universe at this point set in stone and Disney creating their own timeline, it's much easier to go over the events that have transpired already. As for the Imperial perspective, with there being so many fantastic Star Wars YouTube channels out there, this perspective will allow us to be able to distinguish ourselves from their great works. Of course, by looking at the Empire, we will inevitably discuss and cover the enemies and other factions of the universe that plague them, so we definitely will be including that pesky Rebel Alliance as well. With that being said, let's dive into this episode by going over the Empire's organizational structure with all the various different aspects, the government and economic forces that drove it. Throughout this series, we'll be tracking the hierarchy as it changes based on events that unfold. So today we'll be looking over the ideal version, one that shows all the different pieces with a couple of name drops some notable individuals. Now, part 2 of this episode, we'll go over the Imperial Military High Command structure in more detail and how it conducted its operations throughout the galaxy. In order for us to kind of start diving into the Empire, we first need to take a step backwards though and briefly skim over the Old Republic and how we got to this situation. So everyone raise your pint glass and take a sip because the Imperial Cantina is now open for business. The Old Republic would be the dominant galactic government that lasts for nearly 25,000 years. They were able to do this because they were able to outsurvive, outlast, and eventually absorb the rivals into itself. This would include ruthless and savage Sith empires, bloody Mandalorian crusaders, the forever hungry and forever ambitious Hutts, and various other petty tyrants and factions that would pop up from time to time. Now, in 1000 BBY, the Ruusan campaign would mark the end of the new Sith Wars, as the last Sith factions in the galaxy were effectively destroyed in the conflict. The Sith were thought to have become extinct, actually went into hiding, began waging wars of proxy from the shadows to try and achieve their ultimate goal, gaining the revenge against their hated foes of the Republic and those do-gooder Jedi that served it. Now, with the Sith supposedly gone, the Hutt Empire no longer seen as a threat to the Republic's survival, and the Mandalorians incapable of launching a galaxy-threatening crusade again, meant there was a real window where there was no major military conflict occurring. This allowed the Republic to actually begin disarming their military, and this disarmament would help usher in an age of peace and prosperity that lasts over the next 1,000 years. Cheers. Now, having a limited and reduced role of central government was for the most part beneficial, as allowed the local systems to govern themselves with relatively little interference. Things began to change and get worse, however, over time, was when corruption became more rampant and tensions between the core and mid-rim worlds towards the outer rim increased. One of the major factors that caused tension was an indirect result of the Republic disarmament, as well as increased prosperity, thus spreading throughout the galaxy. The lack of a strong central military created a vacuum that allowed pirates and other criminal elements to run rampant in the trade lanes by raiding commercial vessels. What made it even more attractive to these pirates was these vessels happened to now be carrying much more valuable and vulnerable cargo, especially in the isolated Outer Rim systems. This forced corporations like the Trade Federation Techno Union to begin arming and protecting their ships against these pirates, as the Republic was both incapable and unwilling to keep the trade lanes safe. That these corporations would then use these same weapons to strong arm the systems of the Outer Rim to get more lucrative deals created even more chaos and resentment in the Outer Rim. These companies used their extravagant wealth and their legal representation in the Senate to prevent Republic interference in these systems, which also continued the cycle of exploitation. Conflicts such as the Trade Federation's blockade of Naboo is a perfect example of the Republic's inability to resolve conflicts and disputes. The Outer Rim was so convinced that nothing could be done to prevent this exploitation by their much more richer and affluent systems in the core and mid-rim that they eventually decided to succeed and form the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Thus, the Clone Wars would begin and ultimately cause the Republic's collapse and transformation into the First Galactic Empire. In many ways, it might be better for us to look at the Old Republic as much as a confederation of nation-states rather than just one unified government. Systems like Naboo, Ryloth, Mon Calamari, and Corellia had their own established local governments, some democratic, some monarchical, depending on the system and species. These governments would then send representatives to guard their best interest in the Republic Senate, who would then elect the Supreme Chancellor from amongst their number. Now, the Empire in many ways kept the same power dynamics of the Old Republic, but they just happened to reverse the flow of the authority. With the Old Republic, you had a situation where regional governments would create the central government by sending their representatives to Coruscant, whereas the Galactic Empire did the exact opposite by having their centralized government on Coruscant send their representative Moffs and later Grand Moffs to local systems to rule by coordinating and dominating those same local system governments. So in a weird oxymoronic way, the Empire was a stronger centralized government that actually delegated the vast powers to the local systems, which made it less centralized than the Old Republic was. So remember, kids, the tyranny of the Empire's philosophy of fresh and never frozen carbonite tyranny is a much healthier and ethical way to suppress your enemies. Hold on a sec. As alluded to previously, the Empire is a multi-tiered federal monarchy, which you can divide into 3, possibly 4 categories or levels of government, depending on how you want to look at it. The first tier or level is the Imperial or Galactic level. This tier would of course include the Emperor and his office, the Imperial Senate, Imperial High Command, and the vast majority of Palpatine's advisors. The second tier would be your Oversector or the state level. This would be the tier that would be dominated by the Grand Moffs. The third tier would be your local sector and system level, which is where you'd have both your appointed Imperial Moff from Coruscant and the particular local system's government head of state. A sub-tier of this group, which you might consider a fourth sub-tier, would be the barons or local planetary rulers within a particular system or sector. Another factor that would cause the imperial hierarchy to be very fluid would be how individuals' power would wax and wane, not only based on their official titles, but also based on their standing with Emperor Palpatine himself. Now, there are some rather positives to this type of power structure that go beyond the meta reasons of allowing writers to be able to claim to other writers, my villain is more powerful and a lot cooler than your villain. For Palpatine, this naturally creates a very competitive environment where powerful individuals in the Empire are competing amongst each other and coming up with ideas and solutions to problems that they believe Palpatine would be personally interested in. This sort of structured dynamics can lead to innovative ideas, It allows an organization to hand the reins over to those with the best ideas at the time and allow them to oversee plans that come to fruition with little delay. The Emperor is also able to use the aurora paranoia that comes with this high stress of environment to keep his underlings pitted against each other so that they are dependent on staying in his favor, since he alone would have the power to protect them from their peers and rivals. Now, this does take quite a devious mastermind like Palpatine to be playing 3D, possibly 4D chess, try and maintain this sort of balance by creating and encouraging an atmosphere of political intrigue and backstabbing to bring out this sort of initiative among his minions, while keeping them pitted against each other to prevent them from plotting to steal the throne from him. This also allows Palpatine the additional benefit of being able to possibly distance himself from his subordinates' actions if they happen to, let's say, backfire by blowing up a popular planet, by claiming that particular individual acted on their own authority without his permission. Now, this type of leadership has several drawbacks as well. One in particular is that competitiveness can quickly become a very toxic environment, as it does not encourage teamwork, but encourages sociopathic behaviors where everyone's out for themselves and their own self-interest, rather than what may be good for the Empire or the people they're supposed to serve. This dog-eat-dog world will not always have the best and brightest being the ones that survive these power struggles, but those who may be better at political backstabbing and treachery, which can lead to situations where, let's say, strong-willed individuals who may be strategic and tactical military geniuses get isolated and not utilize their full potential because they didn't have the connections and were outcast from the in crowd. This type of corruption and fighting can often create further problems down the line, and an environment that would encourage plotting like this is only a natural step or evolution for these individuals to decide that maybe things would be better if they got rid of that old man in charge of all this. At the top of the Imperial totem pole lies Palpatine, who elevated himself and the office of Supreme Chancellorship to Emperor after the attempted coup by the Jedi. We're going to have a very special episode of Palpatine coming out, and the fact that he's going to play such a huge role in the many episodes to come means we aren't going to dive into him too much today, other than stating kind of the obvious of, well, this is an empire and he's the Emperor. As for his inner ruling circle, this was composed of the elite and most powerful members within the Empire, whose makeup composed of advisors, military commanders, politicians, businessmen, dark Jedi, intelligence directors, and so forth, with its membership changing based on who was part of the in-crowd of the Imperial Court and who had Palpatine's favor. We can perhaps do a special episode in the future going over the circle in more detail, but for this video we're going to mention several individuals that were consistently part of this inner circle. If the saying that all are equal, but some are more equal than others is true, this is the creme de la creme, with membership being Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, military executive of the Empire, and totally not the Superman to Anakin Skywalker's Clark Kent, Saint Pistage, the Grand Vizier of the Empire, who helps run the day-to-day bureaucracy of the Empire, Grand Moff Tarkin, the war hero of the Clone Wars, the Grand Moff of Oversector Outer, which is one of the largest, if not least, imaginative names of the Oversectors of the Empire, also the founder of the Tarkin Doctrine as well, Mas Amedda, former Vice Chancellor and aide to Palpatine, also the head of the Imperial Senate as well, Aras Danger, advisor to Palpatine, in many ways the spokesman / press secretary of the Empire, and was in fact the one who officially proclaimed the Tarkin Doctrine to the galaxy, and Ved Kenned, master instructor and arguably the captain of the Royal Imperial Guard. While Darth Vader was the most well-known and prominent Force user that served the Empire, Palpatine's own mastery of the Force not being as publicly well-known, he was not the only Force user to openly serve, however. These dark side users can be broken down into several different categories. Inquisitors, mostly made up of former Jedi such as Jarek, this group would ruthlessly hunt down their former comrades to either exterminate them or to break them to the dark side and force submission and service to the Empire, a fate they themselves had experienced prior. Supreme prophets of the dark side, Under the leadership of the Supreme Prophet Kadan, a dark side cult that was famous for its prophetic ability to see the future. The fact that they used their force powers, assassination skills, and intelligence skills to help cheat and make sure that prophecies of their leaders came true only made them a force to be reckoned with and feared throughout the galaxy. The Emperor's Hand. This elite group of assassins were individuals who answered directly to the Emperor himself, and could be used to remove higher-ranking officials in a way that wouldn't draw too much attention. Saraseth West, Mara Jade, and Lumia are three famous examples. The Dark Side Elite. This group that would be formed much later were elite dark side users who were infused with dark side powers to become extension of Palpatine's will. Originally composed of 7 members, their roster size would fluctuate, with Cedrus and Bill Gore being the most prominent members. The Empire had multiple intelligence groups that were created to help enforce its will across all aspects of life by rooting any potential corruption or treason. These agencies had differing agendas and duties, with some having a more visible presence, while others were more hidden in the shadows, where only the elite few were even aware of their presence. Imperial intelligence is of course the biggest and most well-known of the intelligence agencies. From spies in the field, analysts that interpreted news and information, as well as internal police to ferret out treason. This organization was so large that it often actually had competing directors of Imperial intelligence, one between the Izard family, Armand and his daughter Isani, and on the other the dark side user known as Chronal, aka Shadowspot, on the other. The Izard family tended to be more recognized publicly of the leadership, often appearing with other high-ranking officials, especially the Emperor, whereas Chronal was almost always on the move with his elite and infamous Shadow Troopers, an elite stormtrooper legion that wore black stormtrooper armor that carried out his personal commands. The Imperial Security Bureau was another intelligence agency that focused primarily on security and law enforcement side of things, with one of its most famous commanders was former Clone Wars veteran and former Navy Admiral Colonel Willof Yularen. This Imperial Security Bureau was seen as the little brother of Imperial Intelligence, or we can see them more as the FBI to the Imperial Intelligence CIA. If an army marches and survives on its stomach, then the government can only function and survive on its economy. The Empire is certainly no exception, as many various businessmen and women became key figures in the decision-making that helped dictate imperial policy. Shipping magnates like Prince Caesar and Ragez Diascha controlled vast merchant fleets that helped supply imperial forces throughout the galaxy, as well as move commercial goods and entertainment. Both were a part of the Emperor's inner circle. Now, the fact that Prince Caesar may or may not have been the head of the galaxy-spanning Black Sun criminal organization could be a factor as how it became so influential, except those who tend to say such silly rumors also tend to find themselves mysteriously falling off the tall skyscrapers. To entertain the average imperial citizen, movies and shows were created that extolled the virtues of the Empire and its Emperor. The biggest media mogul was Maud Windcaller, whose news agency pushed the popularity of such holodramas as the Black Panther and other pro-imperial propaganda. Her army of paparazzi was in many ways a privatized intelligence agency propaganda machine that entertained billions of citizens with the drama of childhood actors Garrick Lauren and Caston Dunn, who lived that playboy lifestyle of childhood actors of chasing women, alcohol, and spice. In fact, it was most likely one of Windcaller's paparazzi agents that provided the intelligence that led to the disastrous raid to save Garrick Lauren from rebel terrorists who had held the famous child actor hostage. His publicized death at his captor's hands was to help prevent future embarrassing truth that Garrick became sympathetic to the terrorist goals to overthrow the Empire, and that went just beyond a case of pure Stockholm Syndrome. Well, friends, it was a real pleasure to be your host on this grand opening of the Imperial Cantina. This episode, we're able to briefly look over history of the Old Republic, as well as take a glimpse at the Imperial Hierarchy that shows the Empire isn't just a monolithic entity with lots and lots of laser guns. Now, don't worry, the laser guns and pew-pewing is going to be covered in part 2 of this episode with the Imperial military and its high command structure. After that, we'll dive into our historical episodes by starting off with the ending of the Clone Wars and the immediate aftermath. Hope you're as excited as I am about future episodes, especially when we get to the Warlord period, as we'll be analyzing and discussing how the Empire crystallized and broke into all those bits and pieces that it did. Now, if you have any Star Wars questions you'd like to ask the Imperial Cantina, or any topics you'd like to be made into an episode, please leave a comment in the comment section. And if you like this episode and would like to watch more content like this, please hit the like and subscribe button. This is the Imperial Cantina, and to all Star Wars fans out there, cheers.